After our family reunion, I checked my bank account. It was empty. My son-in-law snorted, "We needed it more than you." My name is Evelyn, and I turned 70 last spring. Until that moment, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, I thought all the surprising chapters of my life had already been written. I was wrong. The day had started so well. The reunion had been beautiful. We laughed, passed dishes around the table, and for the first time in years, everyone fit around without anyone glaring at each other. My granddaughter brought a photo album, and we all cried over old summer pictures of better days. It felt good. Ordinary. Safe. Then I opened my banking app. I hit refresh because surely this was a mistake. The number on the screen glowed back at me. 0. Then a string of zeros where my small nest egg used to be. The money I had been saving for years, the cushion that meant I could stay in my own home and not become a burden to anyone, had vanished. My hands went ice cold. I tapped the screen again, willing the app to correct itself. It did not. The room tilted just slightly, the way it does when your body realizes something terrible before your mind catches up. My chest tightened. That money was not just numbers on a screen. It was my independence. It was every sacrifice I had made, every small comfort I had denied myself so I could have security in these final years. My daughter Nina was in the living room, helping her eldest with a jigsaw puzzle. She glanced up and must have seen how white my face had gone. "What's wrong, Mom?" she called out. I could not speak. I just held up the phone, my hand shaking. She walked over, looked at the screen, and her jaw tightened in that way it does when she is trying not to show impatience, like I had done something foolish, like this was somehow my fault. Before I could say anything, Derek, her husband, snorted from the couch. He had a beer in his hand, and the kind of smirk you see on someone who just won a bet you did not know you were part of. "We needed it more than you," he said, almost amused. His tone sliced through me worse than any shout ever could have. The coffee in my mouth tasted like metal. The puzzle pieces on the table blurred together. Everything else in the room vanished, except for those words hanging in the air, mocking me. "We needed it more than you." For a moment, I could not breathe, could not think. The betrayal was so intimate, so close. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed. I sat there, trembling, and reached for my bag. The old instinct to gather my things and leave, to get out of the storm, took over. But something else rose up in me too. Something I had buried for too long under years of being accommodating, of being the family's safety net, of never saying no. My voice, when it finally came, was small but steady. "Then you won't mind what's coming next," I said. They laughed. Derek actually laughed, like I had told a joke. Nina looked away, uncomfortable but not intervening. My granddaughter, sensing the tension, started to fidget with her puzzle pieces. I did not smile back. I did not blink. "Before you go any further, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. And if this story is hitting close to home, or if you just want to see where this goes, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not already, because what happens next, you are not going to want to miss. Trust me on that." Now, back to that moment. The room had gone quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Derek's smirk was still there, but something in his eyes flickered when he saw I was not backing down. Then, a loud bang shook the house. It sounded like it came from the back door, and the timing was so perfect it felt like the universe had been waiting for this exact moment to make an entrance. For a split second, I thought maybe the neighbor had dropped something heavy, maybe a branch had fallen. But then the door flew open. Late afternoon light spilled across the kitchen floor, bright and unforgiving. I heard footsteps, firm and deliberate. Nina's face went white. Derek's amusement froze into something harder, something that looked almost like fear. My granddaughter started to cry. And there, standing in my doorway, were two figures I had not expected to see. Not yet, anyway. Two city officers stepped inside, their badges catching the light. They were not here for tea. The taller one had graying hair and the kind of face that had seen too many difficult conversations. The shorter one carried a tablet and a notepad. Both moved with a quiet authority that filled the room faster than any raised voice could have. "Mrs. Evelyn?" the taller officer said, his voice steady and respectful. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. This is Officer Bennett. We received a report from your bank regarding unauthorized transfers from your account. May we sit down?" I blinked, still clutching my phone. You received a report?" "Yes, ma'am," Officer Bennett said, pulling out a chair at my kitchen table without waiting for permission. "Your bank's fraud detection system flagged multiple large transfers. They're required by law to report suspected elder financial exploitation. We need to take your statement." Elder financial exploitation. The words landed heavy in the room. Nina's mouth opened, then closed. Derek set his beer down on the coffee table, his earlier amusement completely gone. He shifted his weight, avoiding everyone's eyes. My granddaughter buried her face in her mother's side, confused by the sudden tension. Officer Rodriguez sat across from me, his movements calm and professional. It was the kind of calm that felt kinder than any fury, because it was steady and real. He was not here to judge me. He was here to listen. "Mrs. Evelyn, can you tell us when you first noticed the discrepancy in your account?" "Just now," I said, my voice still shaking slightly. "I opened the app after our family reunion. Everything was gone. My savings, my emergency fund, all of it." Officer Bennett tapped notes into his tablet. "And how much are we talking about?" I told him the number. It was not a fortune, not by some standards, but it was mine. It was years of careful budgeting, of skipping restaurant meals and clipping coupons, of saying no to myself so I could have yes when I truly needed it. Nina started to speak before I could continue. "Officers, my mother has been a little confused with technology lately. She might have clicked on something. Or maybe she gave her password to someone by accident. You know how scams work these days." The way she said it made me sound senile, incompetent. Officer Rodriguez looked up slowly from his notepad. His gaze moved from Nina to me, measuring. "Ma'am," he said to Nina, "we'll need to see identification and any relevant documents. We'll also need to ask about anyone who had access to your mother's banking information. Anyone who had access." The question hung in the air like a spotlight. Derek stood up suddenly, too quickly. "I need some water," he muttered, heading toward the kitchen sink. His hands were unsteady. Officer Bennett watched him move. "Sir, we'll need you to stay in the room, please." Derek froze, then turned back, his face tight. "Of course, just thirsty." I pulled myself together and handed over the information I had saved on my phone. Account statements I kept backed up in the cloud, receipts for regular deposits, the small spreadsheet I had maintained for years to track my pension and expenses. I had always been meticulous. It was how I had kept my independence this long. "Mrs. Evelyn," Officer Rodriguez said gently, "you keep very organized records. That's going to help us significantly." As he scrolled through the documents on his tablet, his expression shifted from neutral to something more focused. Officer Bennett leaned over to look, and they exchanged a glance that said more than words. "These transfers," Rodriguez said, "they're not random, they're methodical. Regular intervals, large amounts. Someone used your online banking login multiple times over the past 6 weeks. 6 weeks. My stomach dropped. "They also changed your password," Bennett added, looking up at me, "and rerouted your account alerts to a different phone number. That's why you didn't receive any notifications." The room went very quiet. Even the clock seemed to stop ticking. Nina's fingers twisted together. "That doesn't mean—" "Ma'am," Officer Bennett interrupted gently but firmly, "this level of access requires personal information. Security questions, previous passwords, possibly even physical access to documents. This wasn't an outside scammer. Whoever did this knew Mrs. Evelyn's routines, her personal details, her schedule." Derek's face had gone pale. He sank back onto the couch, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Officer Rodriguez looked directly at me, and there was something soft in his eyes that I had not expected. Compassion, maybe, or respect. "Mrs. Evelyn, this is elder financial exploitation. We see this more often than people realize, and I'm sorry to say that in most cases, it's committed by family members or close friends. People who have access and opportunity." He paused. "We'll take your full statement, and we'll begin an investigation immediately." My granddaughter started crying harder. Nina tried to comfort her, but her own hands were shaking. As the officers stood to leave, they handed me a card with case numbers and contact information. They promised someone from the fraud unit would follow up within 24 hours. They took photos of my documents with my permission. They were thorough, patient, and kind. At the door, Officer Rodriguez turned back. "Mrs. Evelyn, I want you to know something. You did nothing wrong. Keeping good records, noticing quickly, calling this in, that takes strength. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." I nodded, not trusting my voice. After they left, the house felt different. Smaller. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and barely contained panic. Derek made a move to say something, but whatever words he had prepared died in his throat when he saw the look on my face. Nina stood frozen, her arms wrapped around herself. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling back, sharp and clear. This was not a mistake. This was not confusion or carelessness on my part. This was theft. It was intimate, calculated, and timed to moments when I would not notice. Someone close to me, someone I had trusted and fed and helped, had methodically emptied my life savings. And they had done it on purpose. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been impossible, my mind replaying every conversation, every favor, every moment. I had missed the signs. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. If the officers needed a statement, if the bank needed proof, then I would give them everything. I had spent years keeping my finances organized precisely so I would never lose track of my independence. Now that discipline would serve a different purpose, I started pulling files from my cloud storage. Bank statements going back 3 years, receipts for every transfer I had authorized, the spreadsheet where I tracked every penny of my pension, every grocery trip, every utility bill. I had always been careful, methodical even, because I never wanted to be caught off guard. The irony was not lost on me. I had prepared for emergencies, for medical bills, for home repairs. I had not prepared for my own family to treat me like an open wallet. As I worked, memories surfaced unbidden. Small moments that had not seemed important at the time, but now formed a pattern I could not ignore. 2 years ago, Derek had lost his job. They needed help with the mortgage. I paid 3 months of payments without hesitation because that is what family does. Nina had cried on my shoulder, promised they would pay me back as soon as things turned around. They never did. Last year, their car broke down. The repair bill was steep. I covered it because they needed reliable transportation for work, for my granddaughter's school. Derek had hugged me, called me a lifesaver. 6 months ago, Nina mentioned business troubles, something about a failed investment, a partner who disappeared. I wrote a check without asking too many questions because I trusted her judgment. Each time, I told myself it was temporary help. Each time, they promised repayment. Each time, the subject quietly disappeared from conversation until the next crisis arrived. I had not kept a tally because you do not keep score with people you love. But someone had been keeping score, and they had decided I owed them more than I had already given. I printed everything I could. The stack of papers grew higher on my table. Account histories, transaction logs, the email confirmations from transfers I actually authorized versus the ones I never approved. The difference was stark when laid out side by side. Around 8 in the morning, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was a name I had not called in years but had never deleted. Robert Chen, an attorney I had helped a decade ago when he was fresh out of law school and needed volunteers for a community legal clinic fundraiser. I had organized the whole event from my kitchen, made calls, gathered donations, turned it into something that gave him the credibility he needed to start his practice. He had told me back then, "If you ever need anything, call me." I called. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Evelyn, is that really you?" "Robert, I need help." His tone shifted immediately. "Tell me what happened." I explained everything. The missing money, the officers, the realization that someone close had systematically drained my accounts. My voice stayed steady, but barely. "I'll be there in an hour," he said without hesitation. "Don't talk to anyone about this until I arrive. Document everything, but do not confront anyone. Understand?" I understand. He arrived 50 minutes later, briefcase in hand. Looking older, but still carrying that same focused energy I remembered. He sat at my kitchen table as if he had always belonged there and read through every document I had compiled. "You kept everything tidy," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Good instincts, Evelyn. This is going to make our case much stronger." Our case. The words settled over me like armor. "What we're looking at here," Robert continued, flipping through the statements, "is not just theft. It's elder financial abuse, possibly fraud, maybe even forgery if they changed passwords or authorization forms. Whoever did this was systematic." He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls. The first was to a banking fraud specialist he knew. The second was to a private investigator who handled financial crimes. "We'll file an official report with the bank's fraud department," he explained. "We'll also work with the police to build a criminal case. But I want my own team looking at this too. Because banks move slowly and we need to freeze whatever assets we can before they disappear completely." "Can we get the money back?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "We'll fight for every penny," Robert said firmly. "And we'll make sure whoever did this faces consequences. But Evelyn, I need you to prepare yourself. This is going to get difficult. Family cases always do." I nodded. I already knew it would be difficult. I had known the moment I saw that 0 on my screen. Robert spent the next hour going through the transaction history, line by line. His fingers stopped on a section near the middle of the page. "Look at this," he said, turning the laptop toward me. "See these withdrawals, small amounts, 200 here, 300 there. They're all timed to specific days." I leaned closer, squinting at the dates. "Tuesdays and Thursdays," I said slowly. "Those are the days I volunteer at the community center. I'm gone from 10 until 3. Robert's expression hardened. "They knew your schedule. They waited until you were out of the house to make the transfers, so you wouldn't get any immediate alerts or notice unusual activity." The realization hit me like cold water. This was not impulsive. This was planned. Someone had watched my routines, learned my patterns, and used my predictability against me. Robert closed the laptop and looked at me with something that might have been anger on my behalf. "Evelyn, we're going to find out exactly who did this and how deep it goes. I promise you that." I believed him. For the first time since seeing that empty account, I felt something other than shock and hurt. I felt resolve. Within 48 hours, things started moving faster than I expected. Robert called early Wednesday morning. "The bank has placed temporary holds on several accounts linked to the suspicious transfers. They've also opened a formal fraud investigation channel. You should receive a call from their security team today." I did. A woman named Patricia from the bank's fraud department spoke to me for nearly an hour, walking through every transaction, confirming what I had and had not authorized. Her voice was patient, kind even, but all business. "Mrs. Evelyn, we're treating this as a priority case," she said. "Our forensics team is already analyzing the login data. We should have preliminary findings by end of week." Forensics team. The words made it feel more real, more serious. This was not just my word against theirs anymore. There would be evidence, digital footprints that could not be explained away with excuses. Friday afternoon, Robert arrived at my house again, this time with a man who introduced himself as David, a digital forensics specialist. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with glasses and the kind of quiet intensity that came from staring at screens all day. He set up his laptop on my kitchen table and pulled up a series of files that looked like nothing but numbers and codes to me. "Mrs. Evelyn," David said, "I've been reviewing the access logs from your bank account. What I found is concerning but also very useful for your case." He turned the screen toward me. "See these entries here? These are device identifiers. Every time someone logs into your account, the system records what device was used, the IP address, and the approximate location." I leaned forward, trying to make sense of the jumble of information. "Your usual logins," he continued, highlighting a section in green, "come from your phone and your home computer. Same IP address, same location, very consistent." He scrolled down to another section, this time highlighted in red. "But these logins? Different device entirely, a laptop, and the IP address traces back to a location about 2 miles from here. The timing matches those Tuesday and Thursday withdrawals we identified. My throat tightened. 2 miles from here. That was where Nina and Derek lived. There's more, David said, pulling up another screen. Whoever accessed your account also changed the alert settings. Your transaction notifications were rerouted to a different phone number. That's why you never received warnings about the transfers. Can you trace that number? Robert asked. Already did, David replied. It's a prepaid cell phone, purchased with cash at a convenience store 3 months ago. Untraceable to a specific person, but the purchase location is near your daughter's neighborhood. 3 months ago. They had been planning this for 3 months. The betrayal settled deeper, colder. This was not desperation or a moment of weakness. This was calculated. Robert made notes on a legal pad. What about authentication? Banks require security questions for password changes. David nodded. They do. And that's where it gets interesting. The security questions were answered correctly, which means whoever did this knew your personal information. Your mother's maiden name, the street you grew up on, your first pet's name. These aren't things a stranger would know. I felt dizzy. I had shared those stories at family dinners, over holiday meals, during long conversations when Nina was young and curious about my past. I had given them the keys to my own vault without realizing it. There's one more thing, David said, pulling up what looked like a scanned document. The bank sent me this. It's a form that was submitted to authorize certain changes to your account. It has your signature on it. I stared at the signature. It looked like mine, but something was off. The loops were too wide, the pressure uneven. That's not my signature, I said firmly. I know, David replied. I compared it to samples from your other documents. The inconsistencies are clear. Someone forged this. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. Forgery adds another layer to the criminal charges. Do we know who submitted this form? It was notarized, David said, by a notary named Thomas Brennan. I looked him up. He's affiliated with a community club in your son-in-law's neighborhood. They likely know each other. The pieces were coming together, forming a picture I did not want to see but could not look away from. Robert stood and paced to the window. We need to connect Derek directly to these logins. Can we do that? I'm working on it, David said. I've requested additional metadata from the bank. If we can match the login timestamps to Derek's known whereabouts, we'll have something concrete. That evening, after they left, I sat alone in my kitchen with a cup of tea I did not drink. The house was too quiet. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. My phone buzzed. An email from David. The subject line read, "Timestamp match found." I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single attachment, a screenshot showing a login to my bank account at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks ago. Below it, David had added a note, cross-referenced with phone records and social media activity. Derek posted a photo from your daughter's home at 11:52 that same morning. Location metadata confirms he was there during the exact window of this login. I stared at the timestamp, 11:47. I remembered that day. I had been at the community center, helping organize a food drive. I had come home around 3, tired but happy, unaware that while I was doing good for strangers, someone I loved was stealing my future. The evidence was right there, undeniable, time-stamped, documented. Derek had logged into my account from his own home and transferred my money while I was out helping others. And now I had proof. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and my mind wandered back through the years, trying to understand how I had become this to them. Not a mother, not a grandmother. A resource to be drained. I had not always been alone in this. There was a time when my husband was here, when we built this life together. He died when Nina was 16, a sudden heart attack that left us reeling. One day he was laughing at the dinner table, the next he was gone. Just like that. I became a single parent overnight. I worked 2 jobs to keep Nina in her school, to keep the house, to make sure she did not lose more than she already had. I learned to fix the leaking faucet myself. I changed the oil in the car by reading a manual. I planted a vegetable garden so we could save money on groceries. Every choice I made was about survival and about giving Nina a stable foundation. When she went to college, I worked overtime to help with tuition. Not all of it, but enough that she graduated with less debt than most of her friends. I was proud of that. Proud of her. She was smart, capable, determined. When she met Derek, I wanted to like him. I really did. He was charming, attentive, said all the right things. At their wedding, he hugged me and called me Mom and told me he would take care of my daughter. For a few years, it seemed like he would. But somewhere along the way, the requests started, small at first. Could I watch my granddaughter for the weekend so they could take a trip? Of course. Could I lend them a little money to cover a car insurance payment? Absolutely. Could I help with the deposit on their new apartment? Without question. Each favor felt reasonable on its own. It was only when I looked back that I saw the pattern. I had been filling gaps for years, patching holes that should not have existed if they managed their money better. There was the time Derek started a business with a friend. He needed startup capital. I gave him $8,000. The business folded within 6 months. He never mentioned paying me back, and I never asked because I did not want to seem petty. There was the vacation they took to Florida 2 years ago, the one they said was a much-needed break after a hard year. They posted photos of fancy restaurants and beach resorts. A week later, Nina called to say they could not make rent and could I help just this once. I sent the money the same day. Last Christmas, I bought gifts for my granddaughter and also quietly paid their electric bill because Nina mentioned it was overdue. I wrapped the payment in an envelope and slipped it to her without Derek seeing because I knew he would be embarrassed. Or so I thought. Maybe he was not embarrassed at all. Maybe he expected it. I had been the safety net for so long that I had forgotten I was allowed to say no. I had confused love with obligation, generosity with surrender. Somewhere in all those years of giving, I stopped asking if they appreciated it. I stopped asking if they even respected me. Lying there in the dark, I realized something else. Derek had not just stolen money, he had stolen the meaning behind it. Every dollar I saved was a choice I made. A meal I skipped, a coat I did not replace, a trip I never took. That money represented my autonomy, my ability to care for myself so I would not become a burden. And he took it as if it meant nothing. The hurt was still there, deep and sharp. But something else was rising alongside it. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, clearer. Strategy. I sat up in bed and turned on the lamp. I reached for the notepad I kept on my nightstand and started writing. Robert had given me advice. Document everything. Build a legal wall. Do not engage emotionally. Let the professionals do their work. I wrote down every conversation I could remember, every request for money, every promise to pay me back, every time Derek made a comment that should have been a warning. The time he joked about my pension being more than I needed. The time he asked if I had a will and who was listed as beneficiary. The time he mentioned I should add Nina to my bank account for emergencies. I had brushed those moments off as casual conversation. Now I saw them for what they were. He had been testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, laying groundwork. I made a list of witnesses. Neighbors who might have seen Derek coming and going from my house on days I was not home. Friends who had heard me mention lending money. The bank teller who knew me by name and might remember unusual activity. I wrote down questions to ask Robert. Could we subpoena phone records? Could we trace where the withdrawn money went? Could we prove not just that the theft happened, but that it was premeditated? By the time the sun came up, I had 5 pages of notes. My hand ached from writing, but my mind felt sharper than it had in days. The plan was forming. Gather proof, build a case so strong they could not lie their way out of it, protect what was left of my assets and my independence. And most importantly, refuse to let their guilt trips and manipulations derail me. They would try, I knew. Derek would get defensive. Nina would cry and beg me to let it go for the sake of family. They would say I was overreacting, being cruel, tearing the family apart. But I was done being the person who absorbed their consequences. I was done being the woman who gave until there was nothing left. This time, I would stand firm, not out of spite, not out of revenge in the petty sense, but out of respect for the life I had built, the sacrifices I had made, and the future I still deserved to have. I got dressed, made coffee, and called Robert. I'm ready, I told him. Let's move forward with everything. Good, he said, because we have a lot of work to do. Robert scheduled a meeting at his office for Monday morning. When I arrived, there was a woman waiting in the conference room. She was in her 50s, dressed professionally, with reading glasses perched on her nose and a large magnifying lamp set up on the table. "Evelyn, this is Dr. Margaret Foster," Robert said. "She's a forensic document examiner, one of the best in the state." Dr. Foster stood and shook my hand with a firm grip. "Mrs. Evelyn, I've been reviewing the documents your attorney provided. I'd like to walk you through what I've found." She spread several papers across the table. Copies of the authorization form that David had shown me, alongside samples of my real signature from old checks and legal documents. "Document examination is part science, part art," Dr. Foster began, adjusting her lamp over the papers. "When someone signs their name, they do it with a specific rhythm, pressure, and flow. These patterns are incredibly difficult to replicate perfectly." She pointed to the authorization form. "This signature purporting to be yours has several inconsistencies. First, look at the pressure points." She traced the lines with a pen. "Your natural signature shows consistent pressure throughout. But here, the pressure is uneven, heavier at the beginning of letters, lighter at the end. That suggests hesitation, someone trying to copy what they're seeing, rather than writing naturally." I leaned closer, studying the subtle differences. "Second," she continued, "the pen lifts. You have a distinctive way of connecting your letters, very fluid. This signature has breaks where there shouldn't be any." The forger lifted the pen multiple times, probably to check their work against a reference. "Can you prove it's forged?" Robert asked. "I can testify to a high degree of certainty that this signature was not made by Mrs. Evelyn," Dr. Foster said. "I can also tell you something else. The ink." She pulled out a small device and held it over the document. "This is a video spectral comparator. It analyzes ink composition and aging. The signature on this form is approximately 3 months old, which matches the timeline. But here's the interesting part." She pointed to a date written next to the signature. "This date was added later, maybe a day or two after the signature. Different pen, slightly different ink composition. Someone signed this form, then came back and dated it to make it appear legitimate." My stomach turned. The level of deception was staggering. "Who notarized this?" Dr. Foster asked. "A man named Thomas Brennan," Robert replied. "We believe he's connected to Derek through a local community club." Dr. Foster made a note. "I'll need to examine his notary records. If he notarized a document he knew was forged, that's a criminal offense on his part as well." She gathered the papers into a folder. "I'll prepare a full report for the court. This should be more than sufficient to prove forgery." After she left, Robert and I met with David again. He had brought his laptop and looked eager to share something. "I have updates," David said, opening several windows on his screen. "Big ones." He pulled up a network diagram that looked like a spider web of connections. "I traced the money. After it left your account, it didn't just disappear. It moved through 3 intermediary accounts before landing in various places." "What kind of places?" I asked. "A down payment on a truck, luxury purchases at electronics stores, cash withdrawals at ATMs near Derek's workplace, and this is the big one." He tapped the screen. "A transfer to a business account registered under Derek's name. A consulting company that appears to exist only on paper. No website, no clients, no legitimate activity. Just a shell to funnel money." Robert whistled low. "That shows intent. He wasn't just taking money impulsively. He created a structure to hide it." David nodded. "And there's more. I got the extended metadata from the bank. Remember those login timestamps? I cross-referenced them with cell tower data. Derek's phone pinged towers near your house on 4 separate occasions when unauthorized logins occurred." He showed us a map with dots marking locations and times. Here, 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 and here. Each time corresponds to a login from that unknown laptop. And each time, his phone was in the vicinity of your home. He was physically at my house? I felt cold. "Or very close to it," David confirmed. "Close enough that his phone connected to nearby towers. This puts him at the scene during the exact times the theft occurred." Robert was already making notes. "This is beyond circumstantial now. We have device data, location data, financial trails, and forged documents. We can build a timeline that shows premeditation and execution." David closed his laptop and looked at me seriously. "Mrs. Evelyn, I need to tell you something. In all my years doing this work, I've seen a lot of financial exploitation cases. Most of them are opportunistic. Someone sees an opening and takes advantage. But this was planned. Methodically. Your son-in-law spent months setting this up." The words landed heavy, but I did not flinch. I had already accepted the truth of it. Now I just needed everyone else to see it too. That evening, a courier delivered a thick envelope to my house. It was from Dr. Foster, her official report. I opened it and read through pages of technical analysis, comparison charts, and detailed explanations. At the end, there was a summary statement. "It is my professional opinion, based on examination of pressure patterns, stroke dynamics, pen lifts, and ink analysis, that the signature on the authorization form dated 3 months prior was not executed by Mrs. Evelyn Carter. Further analysis indicates the signature was forged, likely by someone with access to reference samples of her genuine signature." The date notation was added subsequently, suggesting an attempt to legitimize the document after the fact. Below that, in simpler terms, the signature is a forgery. I set the report down on my kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment. This was the moment everything changed. Not just my word against theirs, not just suspicion or hurt feelings. Evidence, undeniable, documented, professional evidence. Derek had forged my signature to steal my money. And now I had proof. Derek found out about the investigation on a Tuesday. I do not know how he learned. Maybe Nina told him, or maybe the bank contacted them as part of their fraud inquiry. Either way, his response was immediate and ugly. He showed up at my door that evening, unannounced. I heard his truck pull into the driveway with the engine revving louder than necessary. When I looked through the window, I saw him storming toward my front door, his face red and twisted with anger. I did not open it. "Evelyn," he shouted, pounding on the door. "Open up. We need to talk." I stood in my hallway, phone in hand, finger hovering over the emergency call button. "You called the cops on us?" His voice was loud enough that I knew the neighbors could hear. "After everything we've done for you? After all the times we've helped you?" "Helped me." The lie was so audacious, it would have been funny if it were not so frightening. "You're going to ruin this family," he continued. "Nina is a mess because of you. Your granddaughter is crying herself to sleep. Is this what you want?" I did not answer. Robert had been clear. "Do not engage. Do not give him anything to twist or use against me later." Derek pounded on the door again, harder this time. "I know you're in there. You think you're so smart getting lawyers involved? You have no idea what you're starting." The threat in his voice made my hands shake. This was not the charming man who had called me mom at his wedding. This was someone desperate and cornered. After what felt like an eternity, I heard his footsteps retreat. The truck engine roared to life, and he peeled out of my driveway fast enough to leave tire marks on the pavement. I called Robert immediately. "He just threatened you at your own home," Robert said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm calling the police and filing for a restraining order, tonight." Within an hour, 2 officers arrived to take my statement. They photographed the tire marks, took notes on everything Derek had said, and assured me they would increase patrols in my neighborhood. "Ma'am, if he comes back, do not open the door," one of them said. "Call us immediately." That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. Every car passing by made me wonder if it was him coming back. The next morning, I found something tucked under my windshield wiper. A note, handwritten in messy block letters. "Drop this or you'll regret it." My blood went cold. I took a photo of it with my phone before touching it, then called the police again. They came, bagged it as evidence, and added it to the growing file. "This is witness intimidation," the officer said. "Possibly criminal threatening. We're taking this seriously, Mrs. Evelyn." But while Derek's anger was escalating, something else was happening. Something I had not expected. My neighbors started coming forward. Mrs. Patterson from across the street knocked on my door that afternoon with a casserole and an apology. "I should have said something sooner," she told me, wringing her hands. "But I saw Derek at your house several times when you weren't home. I thought maybe you'd given him a key for emergencies, but something about it felt off. He'd be in there for an hour or more." "When was this?" I asked. "Tuesdays and Thursdays, mostly." Over the past few months, I kept meaning to mention it, but I didn't want to seem nosy. I thanked her and immediately called Robert. This was another piece of the puzzle. Derek had not just accessed my accounts remotely. He had been in my home, probably looking for documents, passwords, anything he could use. The next day, Mr. Herrera from 2 doors down stopped me while I was checking my mail. "Evelyn, I heard about what happened," he said quietly. "I want you to know, if you need anything, you just ask. And if that son-in-law of yours comes around here again acting like he did the other night, well, let's just say I've got a clear view of your driveway from my porch." One by one, people I had lived near for years but barely knew beyond polite waves began offering support. They brought food, offered to keep watch, shared observations they had made but never mentioned. It was humbling and heartbreaking at the same time. I had been so focused on being independent, on not being a burden, that I had not realized I had a community around me who cared. David called on Friday with news that shifted the investigation again. "I've been tracking the cash withdrawals from those intermediary accounts," he said. "Most of them happened at ATMs, which are hard to trace to specific people. But I found something interesting. Several of the larger amounts were deposited into a pawn shop account." "A pawn shop?" "Yeah, a place called Mason's Exchange about 10 miles from here. I did some digging. The owner has a history of questionable transactions, not quite illegal but definitely shady. People use him to convert items into quick cash without too many questions." "Why would Derek use a pawn shop?" I asked. "To hide the money trail," David explained. "He buys something with your stolen money, pawns it immediately, gets cash that's harder to trace. It's a laundering technique. Small scale, but effective if you're trying to cover your tracks. Can we prove Derek was there?" "I'm working on that. The shop should have security footage, and they're required to keep transaction logs. If we can get a warrant, we might be able to place him there during the dates of those deposits." He paused. "There's one more thing. I tracked the notary, Thomas Brennan. Turns out he and Derek are more than just acquaintances. Brennan was seen meeting with someone matching Derek's description at a coffee shop 2 weeks before that authorization form was dated. A witness remembers them because they were having an intense conversation, and Brennan kept looking around like he didn't want to be overheard." "Who's the witness?" "A waitress who works there. She came forward after seeing a community post about the case, said she'd be willing to testify if needed." Everything was coming together, piece by piece. The forgery, the cash trail, the notary connection, the witnesses. Derek's carefully constructed plan was falling apart under scrutiny. But as the case grew stronger, so did his desperation. And desperate people do dangerous things. Robert moved quickly after the threatening note incident. By the end of the week, he had filed multiple emergency motions with the court. The first was an immediate freeze on any accounts connected to the stolen funds. The second was a preservation order preventing Derek and Nina from selling property or making large purchases until the case was resolved. The third was the most serious, a formal criminal complaint for elder financial exploitation, forgery, and theft. "These motions will be heard next Tuesday," Robert explained during a meeting at his office. "The judge will review the evidence and decide whether to grant temporary orders while we build the full case." "What happens if he grants them?" I asked. "Derek and Nina will have their finances locked down. They won't be able to access certain accounts, sell their house, or move money around. It'll put pressure on them to cooperate or face the full weight of the legal system." The hearing was held in a small courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor polish. I sat beside Robert at a table facing the judge's bench. Across the aisle, Derek and Nina sat with their attorney, a man in an expensive suit who looked annoyed to be there. Nina would not look at me. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table in front of her, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Derek kept shifting in his seat, radiating resentment. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She reviewed the documents Robert had submitted, occasionally asking questions in a clipped, efficient tone. "Mr. Chen, you're alleging systematic theft and exploitation over a period of several months. What evidence supports this claim?" Robert stood and presented the forensic reports, the bank records, the timestamp data, and Dr. Foster's analysis of the forged signature. He spoke clearly and methodically, building the case layer by layer. The opposing attorney tried to object several times, claiming the evidence was circumstantial, that there could be innocent explanations. The judge listened but did not seem impressed. Your client had access to Mrs. Evelyn's home, knowledge of her routines, and the technical capability to access her banking, the judge said. The forensic evidence shows unauthorized logins from devices linked to him during times he was verifiably in the area. That's beyond circumstantial, counselor. She granted the temporary orders. Accounts frozen, preservation in place, a criminal investigation to proceed in parallel with the civil case. Derek's face went pale. Nina started crying softly. As we left the courtroom, their attorney pulled Robert aside. We'd like to discuss a settlement. Keep this out of criminal court. Your client stole from an elderly woman, Robert said flatly. There's no settlement that makes that go away. The attorney's expression hardened. We'll fight this. Good luck with that, Robert replied. On the drive home, I felt something loosen in my chest. The legal system was taking me seriously. The evidence was strong. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was not facing this alone. But Robert had one more question for me when we got back to his office. Evelyn, have you had any conversations with Derek or Nina since this started? Anything recorded? I hesitated. There was one phone call. About a week ago, Nina called, crying, begging me to drop everything. Derek got on the line at one point. Do you still have that call? Yes. My phone automatically records calls for my hearing aid compatibility feature. I keep forgetting to turn it off. Robert's eyes lit up. Can I hear it? I pulled out my phone and found the recording. My hands shook slightly as I pressed play. Nina's voice came through first, tearful and pleading. Mom, please, you're destroying our lives. Can't we just work this out as a family? My own voice, tired but firm. Nina, this isn't about family anymore. This is about what's right. Then Derek's voice, sharp and defensive. You want what's right? Fine. We took the money. You weren't using it anyway. You live alone in that house doing nothing while we're out here struggling with real bills, real problems. We needed it more than some old woman saving for what? Another 10 years of existing? There was a pause on the recording. I had been too shocked to respond immediately. Derek continued, his tone shifting to something almost mocking. And yeah, I signed your name on that form. So what? You would have said no like you always do when it's actually important. I did what I had to do. The recording ended. Robert stared at the phone, then at me. Evelyn, do you understand what you just gave me? A confession? A complete, uncoerced admission of guilt, theft, forgery, and motive, all in his own words. Robert was already typing notes furiously on his laptop. This changes everything. With this recording, they have no defense. None. Is it legal? Can we use it? You're in a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's admissible. You were that person. He looked up at me with something like awe. This is the smoking gun, Evelyn. This ends the case. I sat back in my chair, letting it sink in. Derek's own words, his own arrogance, had sealed his fate. What happens now? I asked. Now we prepare for trial. We submit this recording as evidence, and we make sure everyone hears exactly what he said. Robert closed his laptop and met my eyes. Get ready, Evelyn. This is about to get very real for them. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when court documents become public record. By the end of the week, people were talking. I noticed it first at the grocery store. The cashier, who usually chatted about the weather, gave me a sympathetic smile and squeezed my hand when she gave me my change. The woman in line behind me whispered to her companion loud enough for me to hear, "That's her, the one whose family stole everything." It should have embarrassed me. Instead, it felt like validation. At the community center where I volunteered, the director pulled me aside. "Evelyn, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. If you need time off, we understand." "I don't need time off," I told her. "I need to keep living my life." She nodded, respect in her eyes. "Well, if you need anything, you let us know." But the real shift came when people started reaching out to Robert directly. Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 houses down, called to say she had seen a moving van at Derek and Nina's house about 2 months ago. Not a full moving van, just a rental truck. She watched them load furniture and boxes, then return the truck a few hours later. At the time, she thought they were helping someone move. Now she wondered if they had been pawning or selling items purchased with my money. The mail carrier came forward with information about multiple packages delivered to their address during the same time frame as the thefts. Electronics, luxury goods, things that did not match their usual deliveries. Even the barista at the coffee shop where Derek and the notary had met agreed to give a statement. She remembered them clearly because Derek had been agitated, speaking in hushed tones, and Thomas Brennan kept glancing around nervously. David compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Forensic evidence, financial records, witness statements, the recorded phone call, location data. He organized it into a timeline that told the complete story from start to finish. "This is beyond solid," he told Robert during a meeting at the office. "Any jury that sees this will convict. Any judge will rule in Evelyn's favor. There's no ambiguity left." Robert scheduled a meeting with the prosecutor handling the criminal side of the case. I went along, sitting quietly while they discussed strategy. The prosecutor, a serious woman named Angela Torres, reviewed the evidence with the kind of focus that made me feel genuinely protected. "This is one of the most thoroughly documented elder exploitation cases I've seen," she said. "Usually we have to piece together bits of circumstantial evidence and hope for a confession. Here, we have everything: the means, the motive, the opportunity, and an admission." "What kind of charges are we looking at?" Robert asked. "Felony theft, forgery, financial exploitation of an elderly person, and potentially identity fraud. Combined, we're talking about significant prison time if convicted. At minimum, probation, restitution, and a permanent record." She looked at me directly. "Mrs. Evelyn, I want you to know that we're going to pursue this aggressively. What happened to you is not just a family dispute, it's a crime, and we treat it as such." I nodded, grateful but also sad. This had gone so far beyond anything I imagined that day at the kitchen table when I saw the empty account. Meanwhile, the social consequences for Derek and Nina were mounting. Nina lost her part-time job at a local boutique after the owner learned about the case. Derek's employer, a construction company that valued reputation in the community, placed him on unpaid leave pending the outcome of the trial. Their friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. The social circle they had cultivated for years turned cold. I heard through Mrs. Patterson that Nina had been seen crying at the pharmacy and that Derek had gotten into a shouting match with someone at the hardware store who confronted him. Their carefully constructed life was collapsing. Robert filed the major evidentiary submission on a Monday morning. It was over 200 pages of documents, reports, statements, and exhibits. Everything we had, organized and indexed, submitted to both the civil and criminal courts. That afternoon, a reporter from the local newspaper called me. "Mrs. Evelyn, we're running a story about elder financial exploitation in our community. Your case has been referenced in public filings. Would you be willing to comment?" I hesitated, then thought about all the other elderly people who might be going through something similar, too scared or ashamed to speak up. "Yes," I said. "I'll talk to you." The article ran 2 days later on the front page of the local section. The headline read, "Local Woman Takes Stand Against Family Theft. Elder Exploitation Case Highlights Growing Problem." My name was in print. The details were public. There was no hiding anymore, no pretending this was just a private family matter. The secret was out, and there was no going back. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I had imagined something grand from television dramas, but this was plain and functional: wooden benches, fluorescent lighting, an American flag in the corner. The judge's bench sat elevated at the front, imposing despite its simplicity. I wore a navy dress I had owned for years, the one I saved for important occasions. Robert sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, his briefcase open and organized. Across the aisle, Derek and Nina sat with their attorney. Nina looked like she had not slept in days. Derek stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. The gallery behind us was fuller than I anticipated. Mrs. Patterson was there, along with Mr. Herrera and several other neighbors. The prosecutor, Angela Torres, sat in the front row, ready to observe for the criminal proceedings that would follow. Judge Harrison entered, and we all stood. She was the same woman from the preliminary hearing, her expression unreadable as she took her seat. "We're here today for the civil hearing in the matter of Evelyn Carter versus Derek and Nina Thompson," she began. "I've reviewed the submitted evidence. We'll hear testimony from witnesses, after which I'll issue provisional rulings. Let's proceed." Robert called David to the stand first. David explained the digital forensics in plain language, walking the court through login timestamps, device identifications, and location data. He showed charts that mapped Derek's movements against unauthorized account access. The correlation was undeniable. "In your professional opinion," Robert asked, "could these logins have been accidental or coincidental?" "No," David said firmly. "The pattern shows deliberate, repeated access during specific windows of opportunity. This was intentional and planned." The defense attorney cross-examined, trying to poke holes in the technical evidence, but David held steady. Every question was met with clear, factual answers. Next came the bank's fraud investigator, a woman named Patricia, who had worked my case from the beginning. She testified about the alert rerouting, the password changes, the transfer patterns. She confirmed that the bank had flagged this as elder exploitation within days of discovering the activity. "We see these cases frequently," Patricia said, "but this one stood out because of how methodical it was. Whoever did this understood banking systems well enough to cover their tracks temporarily." Dr. Foster took the stand after lunch. She brought enlarged images of the forged signature and walked the court through her analysis. The differences between my real signature and the forgery were projected on a screen for everyone to see. "This signature was not executed by Mrs. Evelyn, Doctor," Foster stated. "It was copied by someone with access to samples of her genuine signature, but without the natural fluidity and pressure consistency of her actual handwriting." The defense attorney tried to suggest the differences were minor, insignificant. Dr. Foster shut that down immediately. "In forensic document examination, these differences are substantial and conclusive. This is forgery." Then Robert played the recorded phone call. The courtroom went silent as Derek's voice filled the space, admitting to taking the money, justifying it, confessing to signing my name. His words hung in the air, damning and irrefutable. Nina's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with her hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even their attorney looked uncomfortable. When the recording ended, Judge Harrison sat back in her chair, her expression harder than before. "Miss Thompson," she said, looking directly at Nina, "you're listed as a defendant in this case. Do you wish to testify?" Nina's attorney leaned over to whisper to her, but she shook her head and stood. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to speak." She took the stand, her hands trembling as she was sworn in. Robert approached carefully, his tone measured. "Miss Thompson, were you aware your husband was accessing your mother's bank account?" Nina's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not at first." "When did you become aware?" She took a shaky breath. "About 3 weeks in, I saw a notification on his computer. I asked him about it, and he told me Mom had given him access to help her manage things." "Did you believe him?" A long pause. "I wanted to." "When did you realize he was lying?" Nina's face twisted with emotion. "When the officers showed up, I saw Mom's face. I knew then that she had no idea what was happening. And I realized I had been lying to myself because it was easier than confronting what Derek was doing. Did you benefit from the stolen money?" "Yes," her voice broke. "We paid bills with it. Bought things. I told myself it was borrowing, that we'd pay her back. But deep down, I knew it was wrong. I just didn't want to see it." Robert let the admission sit for a moment. "Why didn't you stop him?" "Because I was scared," Nina said, tears falling freely now. "Scared of what it meant about who I married. Scared of what it meant about who I'd become. I let my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for me, be robbed because I was too weak to stand up." The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing for a moment. "I'm sorry, Mom," Nina said, turning to look at me directly. "I know that doesn't fix anything. I know you have no reason to forgive me. But I'm so sorry." I met her eyes but said nothing. Sorry was just a word. Action would speak louder. Robert called me to the stand last. I walked slowly to the witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. As if I had done anything but tell the truth this entire time. Robert's questions were gentle but direct. He walked me through my relationship with Nina and Derek, the pattern of financial help, the discovery of the theft, the emotional impact. Mrs. Evelyn, why did you decide to pursue legal action rather than handling this privately within the family? I took my time answering, wanting to get the words exactly right. Because what happened to me was not a family disagreement, it was a crime. If I had stayed silent, if I had let them sweep this under the rug for the sake of keeping the peace, I would have been telling myself that my dignity, my security, my life's work meant nothing. I would have been saying that I deserved to be used. My voice grew stronger. I spent years being generous, being the safety net, being the person everyone could count on, and somewhere in all that giving, they stopped seeing me as a person. They saw me as a resource. I had to take action not just for myself, but for every other older person who is being taken advantage of by people they love and trust. Judge Harrison listened intently, her eyes never leaving my face. I want my money back, I continued. But more than that, I want accountability. I want them to face real consequences, because without consequences, nothing changes. When I stepped down, the courtroom felt different, heavier maybe, or clearer. Judge Harrison reviewed her notes, then looked up at both sides. Based on the evidence presented, I'm issuing the following provisional rulings. The frozen accounts will remain frozen. Restitution to Mrs. Evelyn will begin immediately from any available funds. I'm ordering a full asset review to determine what can be liquidated to satisfy the debt. She paused, her gaze landing on Derek. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the criminal court with a strong recommendation for prosecution. The evidence of forgery, theft, and exploitation is overwhelming. Derek's shoulders sagged. Nina continued crying quietly. This court will reconvene in 30 days for sentencing recommendations on the civil side. Criminal proceedings will be scheduled separately. Judge Harrison closed her file. We're adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. It was over. At least, this part was. The weeks following the hearing brought a strange kind of quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but the frantic chaos had settled into something more manageable. The legal machinery was turning now, and all I could do was wait and rebuild. Robert called 3 days after the hearing with an update. The asset review is complete, he said. Derek and Nina have agreed to surrender certain items to avoid further criminal penalties. There's a truck they purchased with your money, some electronics, jewelry. Those will be sold and the proceeds returned to you. The house is mortgaged heavily, but there's equity that can be tapped for restitution payments. How much will I get back? I asked. Not everything, not right away, but we're looking at about 60% within the next 6 months, and the rest in structured payments over 2 years. It's not perfect, but it's enforceable. 60%. It was more than I expected, honestly. Enough to restore some of my security, enough to know I would not lose my independence after all. There's more, Robert continued. Derek's employer officially terminated him. The company cited breach of trust and moral character clauses in his contract. Nina's been ordered by the court to find full-time employment to meet her restitution obligations. They're selling the house, moving to a smaller place, 3 towns over. I absorbed the information without satisfaction or glee. These were just facts, consequences they had earned through their choices. And the criminal case? Prosecutor is moving forward. Derek will likely face probation, community service, and a permanent record. There's a possibility of jail time, but given his cooperation in restitution, it might be reduced. The judge will decide at sentencing next month. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and let myself feel the weight lifting. It was not gone entirely, but it was lighter. My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Patterson. We're having a little gathering this Saturday. Just neighbors. We'd love for you to come. I had not been to a neighborhood gathering in years. I had always kept to myself, not wanting to be a bother, not wanting to impose, but something had shifted. These people had shown up for me when it mattered. Maybe it was time to let them in. Saturday came, and I walked to Mrs. Patterson's house with a pie I had baked that morning. Blueberry, from a recipe my mother had taught me decades ago. The gathering was small and warm. A dozen neighbors, some I knew well, others I had only waved to in passing. They welcomed me like I had always belonged. Mr. Herrera pulled me aside at one point. "Evelyn, some of us have been talking. We want to help you set up better protections. My daughter works in banking security. She'd be happy to come by and walk you through setting up alerts, two-factor authentication, all that tech stuff." "I'd appreciate that," I said, genuinely grateful. Mrs. Chen approached next. "I volunteer with the Senior Center. They have workshops on financial safety and legal planning. I thought maybe you'd want to attend, or even share your story to help others avoid what you went through." The idea of turning my pain into something useful for others appealed to me. "I'd like that." Throughout the afternoon, people offered small kindnesses. Someone recommended a good locksmith to change my locks. Someone else mentioned a lawyer who specialized in estate planning. Another neighbor, a retired accountant, offered to help me reorganize my finances with better safeguards in place. I realized I had spent so much energy trying not to need anyone that I had missed the community that existed right outside my door. The following week, Mr. Herrera's daughter came by. Her name was Sophia, and she was patient and thorough. She helped me set up new banking security, biometric logins, and alerts that would notify me instantly of any unusual activity. "No one's getting into your accounts again without you knowing," she assured me. Robert helped me establish a power of attorney structure with a trusted third party, someone independent who could help if I ever truly needed assistance, but who had no financial incentive to exploit me. I also met with a financial advisor who helped me create a budget and savings plan that would rebuild my nest egg while keeping it protected. She recommended splitting my accounts, creating barriers that would make it harder for anyone to access everything at once. These were practical steps, but they felt empowering. I was not just recovering from what had been done to me, I was building something stronger. One evening, Nina called. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom," she said, her voice small, "I'm not calling to make excuses. I just wanted you to know I got a job. Full-time, decent pay. I'm starting therapy too." Trying to understand how I let things get so bad, I listened without interrupting. "I'm making my first restitution payment next week," she continued. "It's not much, but it's a start. I know I can't fix what I did. I know I broke your trust, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better." "Actions matter more than words, Nina," I said quietly. "Show me over time, not with apologies, but with choices." "I will, Mom. I promise." After we hung up, I sat with the conversation for a long time. I did not know if Nina would follow through. I did not know if our relationship could ever be repaired. But I knew one thing with certainty. I would not let hope make me vulnerable again. I would not let love become a weapon someone could use against me. Boundaries were not cruelty. They were survival. And I intended to survive with my dignity intact. 8 months later, I stood in front of a room full of people at the Senior Community Center, my hands only slightly trembling as I held the microphone. "My name is Evelyn," I began, "and I'm here to tell you that trusting the wrong person almost cost me everything." The workshop was called Protecting Yourself, Financial Safety for Seniors, and I had been invited to speak after the local news story brought attention to elder exploitation cases in our area. 23 people filled the chairs, most of them my age or older, all of them listening with the kind of focus that told me they understood why this mattered. I shared my story. Not all the painful details, but enough to illustrate how easily it could happen. How family members can exploit trust, how important it is to keep records, set boundaries, and never feel ashamed to ask for help or take legal action when needed. "You are not being difficult when you protect yourself," I told them. "You are not breaking up the family when you hold people accountable. You are simply refusing to be taken advantage of." After the workshop, several people approached me. An elderly man with kind eyes shook my hand and said, "Thank you. My son has been pressuring me to sign over my house. I thought I was being paranoid for hesitating." "You're not paranoid," I assured him. "You're being smart." A woman around my age hugged me, whispering that her daughter had been draining her account for months and she had been too ashamed to tell anyone. But hearing you talk about it, I realize I don't have to carry that shame. They should. These moments made the pain worthwhile. If my story could help even one person avoid what I went through, then something good had come from the hurt. Life had settled into a new rhythm. My finances were slowly recovering. The restitution payments came regularly, deposited into my account on the first of each month like clockwork. Nina had not missed a single payment. She called occasionally, updating me on her therapy progress, asking tentatively if we could have coffee sometime. I agreed to coffee 3 months ago. It was awkward and careful, both of us measuring our words. But she showed up. She listened. She did not make excuses. We were not back to where we were. Maybe we never would be. But there was something there, fragile and new, that might someday grow into trust again. Derek, on the other hand, had disappeared from my life entirely. I heard through Mrs. Patterson that he had moved 2 states away, taken a job in construction, and barely contacted Nina anymore. She had filed for divorce. The papers were being finalized. I did not waste energy thinking about him. He had made his choices. Now he lived with them. My Tuesdays and Thursdays were still spent volunteering, but now I also attended a pottery class on Wednesday evenings. The instructor was patient, and the other students were friendly. I was terrible at it, honestly. My bowls came out lopsided, my vases collapsed halfway through shaping. But I loved it. There was something healing about working with clay, about creating something imperfect but mine, about starting over when it did not turn out right, about the quiet satisfaction of finishing a piece and knowing I had made it with my own hands. Last week, I brought home a small, wobbly bowl glazed in blue. It sat on my kitchen table now, holding fruit. Every time I looked at it, I smiled. On a Sunday afternoon in late spring, Nina brought my granddaughter to visit. It was the first time since everything happened that felt almost normal. We worked in the garden together, planting a row of sunflowers along the back fence. My granddaughter dug holes with her small hands, chattering about school and her friends. Nina worked quietly beside us, pulling weeds, respecting the boundaries I had set. When the last seed was planted, my granddaughter stood and looked up at me. "Grandma, will they get really tall?" "They will," I promised. "Taller than you, taller than me. They'll turn their faces to the sun and stand strong." She slipped her small hand into mine, dirt smudged on both our palms. I like that. So did I. As they left, Nina paused at the door. "Thank you for letting us come, Mom." I nodded. "Keep showing up, Nina. That's what matters." After they drove away, I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee in my clean mug, looking out at the garden we had planted together. The house was quiet, but it was not lonely. It was peaceful. I had learned something important through all of this. You can be generous without being a doormat. You can love without losing yourself. You can forgive without forgetting the lessons that pain taught you. I am Evelyn. I am 70, and I am nobody's backup plan. I am not an endless resource. I am a woman who learned to protect her own light, to water her own garden, to stand tall like those sunflowers reaching for the sun. If this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it. Leave a comment telling me your thoughts. Hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this need to be told. We need to protect each other, support each other, and remind each other that we deserve dignity at every age. Sovereignty tastes like coffee in a clean mug, like a garden you tend for yourself, like a life rebuilt on your own terms. And it is